mills.
Damn
I got more appointments than I have time.
good. Okay, could you tell us about Gorman?
Well, first time I met Gorman was at one of the meetings.
No, start it. In the camera all the time. Okay.
You want me to start over?
Yes,
Well, the first time I met Gorman was one of the meetings of the union, you might call it upper grade, not the regular scab mill worker, but the ones who's going to be the leaders like committeeman or steward or so forth for the union or president or on the committee. He came down and had a meeting with him and the Joe Jacobs and different ones, and he made a speech, and I shook hands with him. And I only met him twice. I was only at two of his meetings.
Could you tell us what kind of person he was?
Well, he was just a normal person to me. He wasn't like Roosevelt.
Well, you were, looking back on it, you've been a union leader. Would you comment on him as a union leader?
Well, as a union leader, an uneducated man, to me he was uneducated. I had more education than he did.
Okay. Could you talk about when the strike was over, you went and worked in the shoe factory and so forth, but after a while you became a union organizer. Could you tell us about that?
Well, after the strike, I went back to work, and I went back. The mill needed help, and so my brothers had went back, and they called me, and I went back and quit the shoe place because we'd got a raise out there, and I just lived about a mile from the mill. Atlanta Woolly Mill is just about a mile from my home here. And downtown, I had to pay transportation to get to 5 Points, where the Fifth Avenue shoe shop was, in the old Peachtree Arcade, right across from the Kimmel House.
Now, could you talk to us then about looking back on it as an organizer? Do you think that the flying squadron was a good technique?
Well, it was the only technique.
Just the flying squadron was the
The
only
flying squadron was the only technique because we didn't have telephones, we didn't have radios, we didn't have television, and there were no communications, and so the only word was passed word of mouth.
I understand that Gorman used a radio.
There was no radio that I know of that at that time. Now, I'm talking about in 33 and 34. Later on, 35 and 36, I think they did use the radio, but I don't think we used the radio in 33 and 34.
When did you become a full-time organizer?
I became a full-time organizer in 1950. But I was a volunteer organizer before the CIO was formed. I helped form the CIO under Phil Murray as a volunteer organizer. And John L. Lewis gave us $50,000, and Sidney Hillman gave us $50,000 to help pay expenses, no salaries, but eats and transportation for the volunteer organizers. We gave our time free.
Now, talking about contributions like that, in the 34 strike, did you get contributions and support from the AFL unions in Atlanta?
Yes.
Talk about that.
Well, we got some from Mr. King.
Just start again.
We got in the 34 strike. We got some support from the AFL, which the UTW is the AFL, which was in charge of the strike, and the International was AFL. But I belonged to UTW, United Textile Workers, AFL, and we got some support, but very little, because they wasn't making very much and working very much at that time. And we'd just been through a depression, and nobody had anything to give to anybody hardly.
I've heard some very sharp criticism of George Googe, saying he didn't give you enough support. Could you talk about that? Did you know George?
Yes, I knew George Googe very well, and I thought as much of him as I did of Gorman. And we didn't get no support from Gorman or Googe, or the AFL on the whole.
Okay. Now, people who've been in the textile business, the workers, keep talking about the difference between the way the big bosses would come down and pat them on the shoulder and call them by name and so forth, but the straw bosses, the shift foremen and so forth, were the nasty ones. Could you talk about that whole game they were playing?
Well, Mr. Ron Nixon, who owned the Atlanta Woolen Mill, he had a son, Bill Nixon, who was a vice president. And sometimes he was good and jolly, and other times he was a horse's rear end. And he threatened you if you didn't do what he wanted to. And Mr. Nixon, old man Nixon, everybody seemed to like him because he had a nice personality, like Roosevelt, and he tried to help the old hands that had been with him from the time he started in 1898 until then. He was still with him. And but his son was a college man, and he threatened some of us. Well, I was told, called down to his office, my brother had borrowed some money from the mill, and he called me down and says that I should pay my brother's debt. I says, I didn't borrow it. He's free, white, and 21. I got my own family to look after. Well, we think you should help pay his debt. He's your brother. I said, you got more money than I got. Why don't you pay it? And I didn't get very much work after then. And the second hands, Gene Shirley was a slave driver, and Marcus Emerson, whose mother was a smash hand, was a pretty good second hand because his mother was mistreated. But Gene Shirley was made a second hand, and he tried to treat everybody like he was a damn dog.
Do you think that was a game that the boss knew he could be nice because he had the foremen being rough on people?
Well, it wasn't always the foreman. It was the damn second-hand stool pigeons.
Could you talk about stool pigeons in the mill?
Well, every time you did something that wasn't good for the mill, the damn stool pigeon would go tell on you because you was trying to help your fellow worker or do something and saying things against the company. The stool pigeon would run and tell his boss, and he'd run and tell, and then the first thing you know, it got to the big boss, and they'd call you in for an interview and want to know why you said so and so.
Now, you didn't live in a mill village, I know.
No.
But could you talk about the attitude of people towards the cotton mill people and use the word linthead?
Well, all the people, I finished high school. My dad went to Georgia Tech. I went to Georgia Tech at night school and took textile engineering. And the company bought my books and paid my tuition for me to go to school out there. And I finally became a yarn superintendent at the Atlanta Woolen Mill by going to Georgia Tech. And the company paid my way. That was after we got a union in there. And second had election and we got a union in there.
Could you talk about the...
Well, I tell you something else. They look down at the textile mill as the lowest class people in America. Like you look down today, well, like they did in the 20s and 30s on the niggers. They call them niggers. They didn't call them colored people a Negro. They call them niggers. And they call the textile people linthead. In the textile, you use a linthead, a cottonhead. And they didn't think he had no sense. And yet we had some smart people in the textile industry, working in the mill as well as supervising.
Where do you think that name came from?
Well, everybody that worked in there had lint in their hair, and so it naturally came. When you come out of there, where you been? A fellow didn't know. I've been at work. I said, well, your head's full of lint. And so I imagine it came from linthead, from your hair being full of lint. And before you left, you took the air hose, and blowed the lint off you. Was covered in long lint from the cotton.
Now, could you talk about brucellosis, brown lung? Did you ever have any trouble with it? All of that?
I didn't have any trouble with it, but I had friends. One of the organizers that I worked with from Rome, Georgia, Frank Barker, died. Well, he had TB of the lung, and he collapsed one lung, and he was in that sanitarium that built up at Rome, Georgia, and then he was he was a representative just like me, and he was the same age as I was, and he wasn't as heavy as I was, and he's about an inch taller than me. He weighed about 130, and I weighed 160. But he died from TB of the lungs, from Lent, good friend of mine. George Guest died of a heart attack in Riches, and he was just in his 40s, overworked and underfed and undernourished.
Now, do you know Minnie Lee Washburn? Manny Lee Washburn.
No.
Okay.
Excuse me, George.
Yeah?
The cushion is up now.
Okay.
And before it was down.
No, I think we have to stick with that just now. Okay. Could you talk about the churches and the Union?
Well, I had 3 strikes on me because I was a damn Yankee. I came from Escanaba in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan. My mother was born in Escanaba, my older brother, and I was born in Sault Ste. Marie. My third brother that worked in the mill was a Georgia cracker. But they called me a damn Yankee because I came down here and stayed. And because my mother was Catholic, and before her mother let her marry my father was born down in Griffin, Georgia, and he was a Baptist. But he was 26 years old, my mother was only 18, and you had to be 21 without your parents. And he gave my mother a big diamond ring, and my daddy agreed to be married by the priest and that all the children be Catholic. So being a Catholic, there wasn't 100 Catholics in Atlanta when I moved here in 1920. We only had 2 churches in Atlanta, Catholic churches, St. Anthony and one downtown. And the other thing, me being for the Union, my daddy being a military man and a railroad man, he was for the Union, I was for the Union. So I had 3 strikes. I was a Union man, a damn Yankee, and a Catholic.
Now, some people say that the mill owners paid the preachers and paid for the churches to preach against the Union. Did you ever have that?
Yes, up at Hartwell, Georgia.
Start off.
I was up working in Hartwell, Georgia, and Greenville, South Carolina, trying to organize as a volunteer when this preacher that's out west that said he talked to Jesus Christ, and he was 9 foot tall, and asked everybody to give him $248. What's his name? He's the son. His daughter and his son got killed, and he's the son taking his place.
Oral Roberts?
Oral Roberts. I went to see Oral Roberts right after he was married up in Hartwell, Georgia, and Greenville, South Carolina. The textile mills had him hired and paid his salary and furnished him a car and gas and a house, and he preached against the Union. And I says, you are supposed to be dressed in the Lord's clothes, that you're a preacher, and you're not supposed to preach against your congregation. And most of your congregation is joined the Union, sign Union cards. He said, well, I have to do what the company says to. They pay my way and furnish. That's Oral Roberts. That was before he had any children. He had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl.
Now, after the strike, after the 34th strike, it got rougher for union organizers in some places. Could you describe what you told me a little while ago about getting run out of town and when that was?
Well, I got run out of Hartwell, Georgia. I got run out of Greenville, South Carolina back in the 30s. But the latest one was in Darlington, South Carolina in 54 and 55, and in Sylacauga, Alabama in the 50s. I got run out. I went out to see a second hand in Darlington, South Carolina. His wife she worked spinning. She was a spinner. His wife was a spinner.
Let's start all over again, not again.
I was organizing, international representative organizing Darlington Cotton Mill, which belongs to R.J. Roger Milligan. And I was fixing a petition for an election. And this lady worked in the spinning room, and her husband was a second hand. And she asked me if I'd go visit them. They worked different shifts. That I make and swim him over. Could I swim the ladies on the first shift over? I go out to his house and see him. I park my car out on the street and have to walk a block up to his house because he didn't have a driveway. He couldn't get up. I had to walk. And I got up to the front door. There's a very big dog there. It'd weigh at least 90 pounds, what I call a blue tick. and it was at least 10 years old, and it growled at me. And I raised dogs all my life, so I just opened the screen door to the porch, and it growled. I said, "Shut up!" and walked on up to knock on the house screen door. And it growled, and I hollered at it, "Shut up" again. Finally, he come to the door, and he had that second screen door locked to the house, like my double screen door. And he says, "You're the union organizer, aren't you?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Wait just a minute." He went back and got a double-barrel shotgun, and I was leaning against the screen, and he stuck it right at my navel. I could feel both barrels through the screen door at my navel. He says, "USB," only he used the words, "and get off my property, I'll blow your guts out." Sweat popped out of me, and I said, "Yes, sir." I turned around, the quicker, further I got away from him, the better I was. Because that son of a gun could have shot me and said I come out and tried to cause a fight, and he'd have got by with it because everybody's anti-union. And in Sylacauga, Alabama, there was 4 of us at the motel, and we was organized in 2 Sylacauga mills, and I was in charge. Bob Payton and the other 2 men, I can't think of their name now. There's about 128 second-hand bosses and company pimps came to our hotel. Well, it was a motel at about 1 o'clock in the morning, woke us up, and they only had 8 policemen. The city's a small town. They just had 8 police. They called out the police. The man that run the motel, he was the only one that let us stay. The other hotels wouldn't even let us stay there. He called out the police, and they called the state trooper, and they called the deputy sheriff and the sheriff out, and they told us, "Now we can leave and we'll escort you back to the Georgia line." That's in Alabama. Because we don't have enough help here to protect you. And we advise you to leave. And so we 4 packed up our suitcases and got in all 4 of our cars and followed police escort to the Georgia line. I went on home and I got my double-barrel shotgun, my automatic Browning shotgun, and my son's .22 rifle, and my father's ex-automatic .45 rifle that he'd given me at his death, and got it and put it in my car, and I sneaked in the house, and the door squeaked as it was coming out. And she says, "Is that you, Lloyd?" And my wife did, and I said, "Yeah." And she said, "What you doing?" She got up and she saw me with a rifle and a shotgun and a pistol. She knew I was having trouble, and she asked me not to go back, but I went back. And when I got to the Alabama line, I called the county and the state patrol and told them I had the shotgun, had the rifle, and the pistol, and I had plenty of ammunition, and had it all in the front seat with me. And the first SB that tried to stop me run off the road, I was going to kill him. And then when I got to the city limits, I called the city police and told them. And I went back and spent the night there. I got back here about 6 o'clock in the morning. And I just stayed there, and when we went to breakfast, I carried my son's .22 automatic rifle with me under my arm and went to the dining room and ate breakfast with my son's .22 rifle. And they didn't bother me. And I done told the county police and the sheriff and the state police and the city police. And I asked any of the other 3 boys, "No, we're not going back." I was the only one who went back.
And that was when?
In about the time that old Bob Connors was squirting the fire hose and sicking the police dogs on Martin Luther King. It was right around the same time.
Okay, let's hold it just a moment. Let's try it again. You ready to roll?
Rolling.
Okay, sir.
I was sent down to Sylacauga, Alabama to try to organize the 2 Sylacauga cotton mills. There's about 2,200 employees, and I had 3 men representatives, and we was assigned. I was in charge and had the 3 men assigned different departments that they was friendly with. And one night they woke us up about 1 o'clock in the morning and had about 138 company bosses, second hands, and company scabs out there threatening our lives. And the motel manager was the only place we could stay. He was friendly to the union. The other motels and hotels wouldn't even let us stay there. And he called the city police, and the city police called in the county and the troopers, and they escorted us to the state line, and we all went home. and everybody thought they was home. I went home and I got my guns, my pistol, my rifle, and my shotgun, Browning automatic, in a box of shells of each, and put it in the front seat. And I went back and got back about 6 o'clock next morning. And I went to breakfast with my 22 under my arm. And people said, "What you doing with that?" I said, "You should have been here last night."
Boy, doesn't he know how to cut and stretch? That's beautiful. It just couldn't have been better.
Ready? Lloyd, could you tell me what it was like on the picket line?
Well, it was like being surrounded by a bunch of policemen and enemies.
Could you start again? Tell me, use the picket lines. Start with.
Well, at the Atlanta Woolen Mill picket line, majority of the people in Atlanta was against the Union. And so all the people driving trucks and cars coming by there would holler at us, "Union company, kind of break the company and give us hell." They wouldn't holler at the damn scabs going in trying to break the Union. And we was trying to form a union, help the workers, and they was all against us. Although it was 10-1 against you. On the picket line, going to work, coming from work, anything.
So tell me about the people that were standing on the picket line with you.
No, we didn't stand on the picket line. We walked. They wouldn't let you stand. That was a violation of city law. To stand. You had to walk up and down, make a circle, and come back. You had to patrol. And they had the National Guards every 6 feet with a bayonet on the gun, a loaded rifle, seeing that you did keep moving.
So you had to be moving all the time.
You had to move all the time. You couldn't stop for over a minute. You could stop for a minute and talk to someone for a minute, but you couldn't hold line. You had to step out on the sidewalk or the street or so forth.
Music.
Yeah. Well, first, tell me, how did you keep everybody's spirits up while they were on the line?
You didn't keep the spirits up. They kept them up themselves or they let them drop. You tried to keep them up, but your spirits wasn't too high yourself. You're starving to death, and you wasn't getting nowhere, and you wasn't gaining nothing, and it just looked bad. It looked like a lost cause, which it finally turned out to be.
Well, how did people keep their spirits up?
They didn't.
They didn't.
Could you talk about music?
I've seen some people on the picket lines. They were singing. Tell me about the music on the
Well, the music on the picket line came from the smarter people and the musicians and the ones that had a good voice or something, just like in the movie pictures. You always got someone who stands out at something, and some of them was a great speaker, and some of them was a great singer, and some of them was a good dancer, and do the black bottom of the Charleston dance down the picket line. We had one lady who won a contest at the theater, and she did the Charleston on the picket line.
What kind of songs were they singing?
"We Shall Not Be Moved," and different Union songs.
I don't know any of those Union songs, believe me. If you could tell me, that would be great.
Well, I'm not a singer. So I wasn't there when it comes to singing, because I'm not a singer or a musician. I'm a mathematician and historian.
Okay. But you must know some of those songs.
Well, that was the main one, "We Shall Not Be Moved." That was one of the main songs. And Joe, I forget his name now, I think he's dead now, wrote a lot of the songs and played the guitar. Joe, I can't even think of his name, heavy-set fella, about my age.
Who's the fellow we're going to be seeing, musician?
Marion A. Brown. You know Marion Brown?
Nope.
Because I think he was playing at the time. He played the guitar with his family. He played that kind
Well,
of music.
there's some of them had kinfolks that did dancing, some of them singing. But you mentioned the church a while ago, and then never did get to the church. Well, there's very few churches did anything to help the strikers. They did to help the scabs. In other words, because they was a member of the church, and they would help them feed the scabs that's going in breaking it. But strikers, the church didn't help the strikers very little. Because just like the company, the men that went to church and could give money in donation, they was businessmen, and they wasn't for the union. They was for the non-union, because they knew if the union come in and make their wages go up, and they had to pay more wages of insurance or holidays. We had no minimum wage. working 15 cents an hour, 6 hours, 40 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours a day, $6 a week.
Did the church ever send anybody over to the picket line to talk to you while you were there?
Yes, they sent somebody over now and then trying to get us to go back into work.
The
Different churches at times had some of the deacons who was businessmen, belonged to chambers of commerce, would come over and talk to the pickets, trying to get them to go back in and go to work.
Well, what would they say?
Go to hell.
That's what the deacons would say to the picketers?
No, that's what the pickets would tell the deacons.
And what would the deacons say to the picketers?
Well, you got fighting a lost cause. You're never going to have a union, and you're going to be blacklisted and so forth. And they was well educated. They was deacons in the church. They were leaders in the church, and they had more education than the textile workers. And some of the textile workers belonged to the church that they was the deacon at.
And I'm sure the deacon also brought in the fact that if you were
well, not only the deacons, we had preachers. Oral Roberts, a preacher. He's one of the biggest liars there ever was. He preached against the union, and him a preacher at 2 churches in Hardwell and Greenville.
How many of the talk about the textile workers in politics? How many of them voted or could vote?
I'd say less than 10% of the textile workers could vote because we had the county unit system and the poll tax. You had to pay $1 poll tax before you could vote. And you didn't have that $1, that was nearly a week's wages, take-home pay, after you had your expenses. So very few of the textile workers were allowed to vote. That's the reason Gene Talmadge got re-elected all the time, because the working man, he was the man of the farmer. He got the farmer vote, but he didn't get the working man. He never carried Atlanta or Fulton County.
Okay. Anything else?
I'm sure there is. You got anything else?
No.
No? Think we're done?
I think that's done.
Okay.
Okay, Jamie?
Actually, I do have one thing. Can you tell me a little bit about the strike in Cabbagetown? Did you go to organize over there?
That's Fulton Bag Cotton Mill. Fulton Bag Cotton Mill is known as Cabbagetown today, and it was the largest textile mill in Atlanta. We had another one at Avondale. We had another exposition out here in Atlanta. We had the Atlanta Woolen Mill. We was one of the smallest. We had the Southern Mills right across the street from us. We had the Egan Cotton Mill here in Egan, Georgia, which is East Point. But the Cabbagetown was the largest and one of the poorest textile plants there was. It was one of the richest companies, but one of the poorest people and uneducated people in Cabbagetown. Right at Oakland Cemetery, which is Georgia and Atlanta National Cemetery, where the Civil War veterans on the national side and the southern were buried at Oakland Cemetery.
And the strike, did you go and organize over there at Fulton Bag?
I went at all of them and tried to organize. I didn't organize none of them. I tried to. I talked for the union and tried to show them good points and all. But I didn't organize none of them because we didn't organize a mill in the Southern Textile Strike that I know.
Could you talk about what it costs to be a member of the union and people paying up and then resenting it?
Well, it didn't cost us a doggone thing to sign a union card, and we didn't pay no union dues till we got a contract. They asked for collections. We made voluntary collections, but there was no union dues until you got a contract. And you sign a card volunteer, just like you sign for a driver's license, only it costs you something.
Now, we have heard from some people that some people came along and collected $1 from a lot of people and then disappeared.
Well, that may have happened. There's a rotten apple in there. Some people did get on the picket line and collect money from the pickets and also from the scabs and also from the company and all to help the underprivileged. And some of them did do away with some of the money, but it's so doggone few because there's very little money to go around. Like you always say, there's a rotten apple in every barrel.
Yeah. You know, before you used the term lost cause a number of times. You know, you've said that the deacons told you it was a lost cause, and you mentioned lost cause in relationship to Gorman. And I wonder if you could just talk about the George mentioned before when Gorman ended it. And did it feel like a lost cause?
Yes, when Gorman ended the strike, he admitted that it made a mistake and we underestimated the strength of the company.
Now, some people have described the
That's my interpretation.
Some people have described the strike of '34, because there were so few unions, organized before the strike, as more like a French Revolution than a true strike. What do you think about that?
Well, that's true. After the strike in '34, we had the black shirts come in. We like to have a revolution. We had the